A long, long time ago, I can still remember how the music used to make me smile. And I knew if I had a chance that I could make, you can join in, those people dance, and maybe they'd be happy for a while. But February made me shiver with every paper I deliver. Bad news on the doorstep. I couldn't take one more step. I can't remember if I cried when I read about his widowed bride, but something touched me deep inside the day the music died. What song? American Pie. For over 50 years now, which makes me feel just a little bit old, people have been speculating about what is the meaning of all these kaleidoscope lyrics in the 8.5-minute long ballad that Don McLean wrote called American Pie. I only learned last night that 2 years ago or so, Don McLean actually revealed the meaning of many of these lyrics when he sat down for a documentary called The Day the Music Died, and was able, in the midst of a historical analysis of what was going on in the country at the time that he wrote the song, at the time towards which he was remembering that day in February when 3 musicians died in a plane crash, long before he wrote the song, and in the time after. Only in the midst of all of those sort of news clips and history analyses did he feel that he could finally sit down 50 years after the song had become a hit and speak to what it meant to him when he wrote those words. This was a little disappointing to me because I wanted to use this song as an opportunity to talk with you about the multivalent meaning of art, the way in which song lyrics, poems, paintings hung in galleries have not one but many meanings. And for me in my childhood, the song that stuck out most in that way was this ballad, American Pie. In the interview, McLean talks about how this is a kaleidoscope of the American life for him, and is intended to sort of be a dreamlike state of touching points here and there, both in the world around him and in very personal ways in his life and even his faith. I was encouraged as I read more about the interview to realize that even when finally, after 50 years of saying, I don't really talk about the lyrics, McLean finally sat down and talked about this song, he still didn't give all the answers. There were a few points where he would say, well, that when Lenin read a book on Marx, that could be whichever Lenin you think it might be, or maybe both. Or when he talked about the ballad sung for the king and queen, he said, for me, the king is Jesus Christ. But if you're thinking of a different king, that's okay. That's the power of art, and really the power of an artist, to be able to acknowledge that even when I may have something in mind, when Don McLean may have had a particular incident or moment in his mind when he wrote those lyrics, to acknowledge that someone else may hear and embrace those same words differently, and that the power is no less great. In fact, I dare say, no less true. Parables are like that. When Jesus sits down to tell a crowd or his disciples a story, he doesn't do it with the intent of giving us a single right answer. a single way of thinking about or knowing about God or the world. I suspect that if Jesus thought there was a single right way to tell us about who God is, how God works in the world, and how we are called to work out God's mission in the world, he would have simply said it. And then said it again, and then said it one more time so that we did not get it wrong. But instead, Jesus speaks to us through the art of parable, knowing that we will wrestle not only decades later, but centuries later with what he is telling us in these words. And today's parable is a doozy. It is one that even as I opened up my Bible commentaries to see what the experts of experts have to say about these texts, nobody can agree. One commentary, instead of offering what that particular theologian thought about the text, actually gave me 5 different accounts of what other theologians have said about the text, and then said any one of them could be true. About this time, I was becoming increasingly convinced that Reverend Jim does read the gospel texts before he asks me to preach. But as we wrestle with today's parable, some scholars suggest that perhaps what's at stake here is that the manager, the guy who gets accused, by the way, we don't even know if he's done anything wrong, but the guy who gets accused of fiscal mismanagement, perhaps in the face of complete financial ruin for himself, he decides to go and do a good thing for others, to forgive some debts, whether that might be, some people speculate interest, others speculate that it might be the part that he was taking for himself all along. Some people even think maybe he was correcting the books because the financial mismanagement was that he said they owed 100 and actually they only owed 8. Oh, there's all kinds of guesses. But one general camp says maybe this guy who had done some bad things decided to go ahead and do a good thing for the wrong reason. Because, of course, what he's trying to do is to protect himself. You know, it'd be like if you were worried about the potential ramifications of your own actions and you saw ahead, well, if I do this thing, then I probably can't be prosecuted, so let me try that instead. The financial manager, he does the right thing for the wrong reason. He helps others out of concern for himself. That's one theory. The other theory, and this gives you an idea of how I was scratching my head by the end of the week, the other theory is that perhaps he actually does the wrong thing. That these debts that these people owed are precisely the debts that they owe, and he's now cheating his master, the person who holds all these assets, by just willy-nilly giving away extra sums of money, but he does it for the right reason. Because perhaps he had never mismanaged funds before, and so now he's just protecting himself after his master has gone off the deep end, making accusations without giving him a chance to defend. Or perhaps it is the right thing, the wrong thing, right? Perhaps it is the wrong thing, the forgiving of debts that were legitimately owed, but for the right reason, because by forgiving those debts, it's not just about him and his own well-being after he's been fired, but it is also about creating community. These people who are now welcoming him into their homes, who are feeling happy with one another because they have a little bit less debt, and happy even with the master because he's been seen to be a generous person. So, for a variety of reasons and ways. It could be that the financial manager in the story, has done the right thing for the wrong reason, or the wrong thing for the right reason, and our heads can begin to spin. What does it all mean for us? Some surety begins to land for me when at the end of the parable, Jesus celebrates those who have been faithful, or Jesus' voice in storyteller mode, celebrates those who have been faithful with dishonest wealth, who have made friends with dishonest wealth, for they will welcome them into eternal homes. And if it weren't the Bible, this is when I would throw the book across the room and be done with it. Because it's clearer, right? Okay, if you're faithful with dishonest wealth, you'll be welcomed into eternal homes, except it doesn't make any sense. How are the friends who you made, or I made, with dishonest wealth going to welcome me into an eternal home? We can continue to ponder and wrestle, because in a way, I think this is what Jesus intends us to do with the parable. But for me, in that moment when I decided not to chuck my Bible across the living room, it occurred to me that maybe, perhaps, Jesus is being sarcastic. Maybe, perhaps, when he says, well, great, go and make friends for yourself with dishonest wealth, because they can welcome you into the eternal homes. He is helping us to see what a facade all of this wrangling between 100 vats of oil or 80 vats of oil, or financial bank accounts, or who owes this what and this person that much, really is. Reverend Vaughn asked me if I was going to give a lesson in first century economics this morning. And I'll say only this. If you look at the footnotes in the Bible and they tell you what the approximate worth of 100 vats of oil or these different things that the debtors owed, what you will quickly learn is that what we have is a very, very wealthy man who has other wealthy people owing him money. We're not talking about the kind of debts that lead to whether or not somebody is going to be able to feed their children the next day. We're talking about wealthy people lending money to other wealthy people, such that the amount that was forgiven, to say nothing of the amount that was still owed, would be enough of a fortune to care for not just one, but probably 100 families for a lifetime. What Jesus is talking about in his story is the exaggerated extremes of wealth, perhaps to help us to see at those extremes where the power of wealth begins to come apart, to unravel itself, or perhaps to tie us in its grasps, so that we believe the only way to achieve any good in this life or even the next is to keep up our entanglements with the things of this world, with striving for more and more money, more and more power, more and more prestige. Go ahead. Make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth and see where that takes you. You can read this parable any number of ways. And I think that's the gift of it. But for me, in this moment, in this day, there's something powerful about the possibility that Jesus is pointing to the pointlessness of this whole worldly system. That Jesus is reminding us that it is not the pursuit of wealth or of powerful jobs or prestigious positions or even of comfortable homes to be welcomed in when those things go awry that we should be after. Rather, as children of the light, perhaps Jesus is calling us to make music, to sing together in community, to paint pictures, to celebrate the power of art and human creation when everything else seems to be pushing toward destruction. Perhaps Jesus is calling us to remember that it is not the balance of our bank accounts that determines our place in the heavenly homes, but it is the price that Jesus already pays for us on the cross. The power of love, the power of commitment, of a willingness to stand for what is right even when everything else in the world feels wrong. At the heart, the song American Pie, which draws its name from that idyllic vision of the American 1950s with good old American as apple pie, points to a vision of an earthly, worldly system that was never so idyllic, at least not for all. It points to a vision of a dream that was never lived into. As hard as we try to build those houses, to make those friends with wealth alone, in today's parable, perhaps Jesus is reminding us that the real community, the real friends, start and end only through embodied actions of love. Thanks be to God that Jesus lives that love for us with all his being. And may we strive to live that love for our neighbors as well. Amen.